the United States now. We will bring you the very latest on the coronavirus figures from there because they've also had a difficult day. But first of all, I want to bring you up to date with a political development. It's in relation to the upcoming presidential election. Bernie Sanders has suspended his campaign to become the US president. He thus effectively clears the way for the former Vice President Joe Biden to become the Democratic Party's nominee. And Bernie Sanders addressed his supporters online.
I want to thank all of you who spoke to your friends and neighbors, posted on social media, and worked as hard as you could to make this a better country. Together, we have transformed American consciousness as to what kind of nation we can become, and have taken this country a major step forward in the never-ending struggle for economic justice, social justice, racial justice, and environmental justice.
So Mr. Sanders there addressing his supporters online. President Trump also online. He's been tweeting about this. Bernie Sanders is out. Thank you to Elizabeth Warren. If not for her, Bernie would have won almost every state on Super Tuesday, which was, at the beginning of March. This ended just like the Democrats and the DNC wanted, same as the crooked Hillary fiasco. The Bernie people should come to the Republican Party, he suggests. So I caught up with Anthony Zerka to get his thoughts on the president's reaction.
His assertion doesn't really have any basis in fact. Elizabeth Warren did perhaps take some votes away from Bernie Sanders in the same way that Michael Bloomberg took votes away from Joe Biden. And her presence on the ballot was not determinative in almost every state except for maybe Minnesota or Massachusetts. So for Donald Trump to try to say that, I think, is definitely a stretch, but you can see the strategy behind it here. Donald Trump is trying to foment divisions within the Democratic Party, similar to the ones that were existent in 2016 that may have helped some of Bernie Sanders supporters go to third parties or even back Donald Trump. Donald Trump sees or wants to see that sort of dynamic play itself out again this November. Whether that will be the case or not, now that Donald Trump is running as the incumbent, that remains a question. But clearly that is going to be what he's going to try to do. Paint this as Bernie Sanders being wronged by the Democratic Party and by Elizabeth Warren.
So with the focus now on Joe Biden, the issue here, though, Anthony, is that Joe Biden, we've not really seen much of him recently.
No, we haven't. You have to remember in a normal presidential election campaign cycle, this is kind of a downtime after the primaries have concluded, but before the national conventions, where a presumptive nominee would spend a lot of time fundraising and organizing, finding difficulty getting out into the spotlight anyway against an incumbent. That is made all the harder in this case, where Joe Biden has essentially been confined to his house in Delaware and can only communicate with the media, with supporters, with fundraisers via video conferences and the like. So it is going to be a very real challenge for him to try to break through, particularly when Donald Trump has this national platform with his daily press conferences where he's on television every single day. It is a strange sort of campaign to be in, at least at the moment, but there is months to go before November, and Biden will have his chance to try to wrest that spotlight back from the president.
So our thanks to Anthony for talking us through that. Now, the US has recorded the most coronavirus deaths in a single day, another difficult day for the United States. More than 1,800 deaths were reported on Tuesday. This now brings the total number of fatalities in the country to over 13,000. The US has more than 400,000 confirmed cases, and this makes it the highest number in the world. With New York remaining the epicenter of the country's outbreak, more than 4,000 deaths in New York State, and the state's healthcare system is at maximum capacity. And that's why authorities have started building a temporary hospital at this university campus just east of New York City. This will provide over 1,000 extra beds. Here's New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on the latest numbers.
Bad news isn't just bad. The bad news is actually terrible. Highest single-day death toll yet, 779 people. When you look at the numbers on the death toll, it has been going steadily up, and it reached a new height yesterday.
So another difficult day. Well, in Washington last night, President Trump actually had very harsh words for the World Health Organization. He accused it of being too close to China, at one point even threatening to cut its funding. Well, today, the WHO has responded.
Issues targeted at me personally, I don't mind. I prefer to really focus on saving lives. I said it many times. We're losing people. Why would I care about being attacked when people are dying?
Well, the Director General also urged the US and China to simply come together and not to politicize this virus.
We will have many body bags in front of us if we don't behave. When there are cracks at national level and global level, that's when the virus succeeds. For God's sake, we have lost more than 60,000 citizens of the world.
Well, let's hear from Anthony on the president's row with the WHO.
Well, I think you have to see it in the long line of Donald Trump's response to this viral outbreak, and that is finding other people to blame, other factors beyond his control that are responsible for this growing death toll. He pointed at Democratic governors, such as the governor of Michigan and the governor of New York, as not responding fast enough. Of course, for a while he was blaming China, saying that they didn't control the outbreak in the early stages. Now he's turning to the United Nations and the WHO as being responsible. So it is an attempt to offer the American public, at least, someone else to look at as far as the blame goes. But in the end, it is going to be on Donald Trump's shoulders whether the U.S. succeeds or fails in combating the virus.
Now, let's bring you up to date with some new evidence which has emerged of a link between human destruction of the natural world and pandemics just like this one, like COVID-19. So according to this major study, which was published in the Royal Society, increased contact between humans and animals is causing more outbreaks as viruses jump from animal to human, with scientists from Australia and the US finding up to 75% of human infectious diseases originally coming from animals. So probably no surprise that resilient wild animals, things like rodents, bats and primates, well, they carry the highest number of viruses. But scientists are quick to warn that we shouldn't be blaming animals for outbreaks. Instead, they point to how we humans are destroying their natural habitats through practices like hunting and farming, which is bringing us closer into contact with wildlife. Now, there are numerous theories about the origin of COVID-19. Some of them are a little bit dubious, others a little bit more believable. One theory is sticking in the public mind. This one's been quite persistent. This is that the pandemic that we're seeing started here. This is the now infamous Hunan animal market in Wuhan. It's thought that someone, patient X, was infected with a virus from an animal and then spread it locally before the rest of the world. Scientists are still trying to unravel which species that it actually came from, which is key to understanding this pandemic and finally stopping it. Chinese state media suggest that it was possibly passed from this. This creature is a pangolin. It's a scaly mammal. It looks like an anteater and it's under threat. Scientists say that smuggled pangolins were found to carry viruses closely related to COVID-19. Now, there are other theories. Another one is that it came from bats and that it was passed through an intermediary animal in the same way that SARS was. The epidemic moved from the horseshoe bat to this animal. This is a civet, before then infecting humans. Now, whatever the cause, close contact with animals is being blamed, and that is putting a spotlight on the global wildlife trade. And scientific evidence suggests that SARS-like viruses out there. We spotted this article in Scientific American, and it's on the discovery of dozens of other deadly pathogens in bat caves in China. And the article suggests that Wuhan outbreak was in fact inevitable given its popular animal markets. Well, following this is our science reporter Helen Briggs, who joins us now. So just explain to us the likelihood, with so many different theories, the likelihood of which one is true, and the fact that, well, you know, we are encroaching upon animals' natural habitats as we develop out.
That's right. Well, scientists have been warning for decades, really, of the risk of viruses jumping from animals to humans and all sorts of things linked with that: SARS, MERS, Ebola, and now COVID-19, all thought to have their origins in wild animals. And we know that this seems to be becoming more frequent. And you can go out and you can survey wild animals for viruses. So bats are known to carry a lot of viruses, but they don't actually cause any problems for bats themselves. They don't make bats sick. But if they jump to humans, then they can make humans sick. So really, there's this concentration now on the idea that human health is linked with animal health and indeed the health of the environment, the health of the planet. So what scientists are saying really is this is about human behavior. It's not about animal behavior. And anything that brings humans and animals into close contact can increase the risk. So if we're destroying their habitat, encroaching on the habitat of wild animals, coming into contact with them, that can increase the risk, as can wildlife trade and these wet markets where different species of animals are put in cages and they're crammed together. And that wouldn't happen naturally. And scientists say that's a breeding ground, if you like, for viruses to jump from animals to humans.
So Helen, why aren't these wildlife, these markets that we're seeing, like the one in Wuhan, why aren't they simply banned?
Well, a number of organisations are calling for a blanket ban. Now, China has put restrictions in place on consuming wild animals, and that's expected to become permanent later in the year. Also signs from Vietnam about regulating trade in wild markets. So some wildlife groups are going further. They want all trade in wild animals for human consumption banned, and they want wet markets banned. But others argue that any sort of blanket ban may not be the best thing to do because it risks driving wildlife trade further underground. So they're sort of saying that you need better regulation. You also need better education and try and change cultural attitudes, because as long as people want to eat meat from wild animals, then there's going to be some sort of trade that's going to satisfy that demand. And there are signs coming from China and elsewhere that sort of message about consumption of wild animals is starting to change.
OK, Helen, thanks so much for talking us through that. Helen Briggs, our science and environment correspondent. Her article is on our website. It's fascinating reading, so do take a look at that. Now, so far, we've been talking about viruses jumping from animals to humans, but COVID-19 is also spreading from humans back to animals and between species. New research suggesting cats are able to catch this disease from other felines, while another cat has been infected with the virus after its owner had symptoms. So vets are now recommending that we keep cats indoors throughout the lockdown. And you might remember on Monday we heard about this tiger which tested positive at a New York zoo, while several other tigers and a lion have also fallen ill. They are all thought to have caught it from a zoo employee who hasn't yet shown any symptoms. So is there reason to be cautious? Here's our science correspondent, Victoria Gill.
Probably the most important bit of information, especially for any concerned pet owner, is that there is absolutely no evidence that a domestic cat or a dog, that a pet could give COVID-19, transmit COVID-19 to a human owner. There are no cases where that has happened. And crucially, as well as there being no cases of that happening for SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, There were no cases of that happening during the SARS outbreak either. And SARS is a very similar virus, and scientists studied that entire outbreak. So they have a lot more information about how the disease is transmitted. So people shouldn't be avoiding their pets or worried about their pets infecting them by sneezing. In fact, people's pets might be particularly important to their mental health right now, while a lot of us are living in isolation and with this social distancing and stay-at-home orders in place. Now, there is some evidence that humans could transmit COVID-19 to other animals. So there have been a few cases with domestic dogs and a pet cat, and most recently of a tiger at a zoo in New York that tested positive for COVID-19, and it's thought to have been transmitted from the tiger's keeper. But crucially, those animals didn't become sick. They tested positive for the virus, but they didn't become ill, and they weren't infectious then to those humans.
Well, this virus is taking its toll on the financial situation, on the economies of the global economies. The EU finance ministers have failed to agree on a recovery package to help their economies get back on their feet from this pandemic. The issue has exposed deep divisions in Europe, where Italy and Spain have accused northern nations led by Germany and the Netherlands of not doing enough. Now, the chairman of Eurozone finance ministers, Mario Centeno, sent out this tweet in which he says that after 16 hours of discussion, we came close to a deal, but we are not there yet. He said that he suspended the Eurogroup and will continue talks on Thursday. My goal remains a strong EU safety net against the fallout of COVID-19 to shield workers, firms and countries, and to commit to a sizable recovery plan, but no agreement yet. So let's get more on why there's been so much disagreement. Here's Gavin Lee in Brussels.
All of the finance ministers of those countries that share the euro as a currency, 19 different countries in the eurozone, the idea is, what do you do? It's a big existential question that Angela Merkel said is the biggest test for the EU just the other day. How do you support those countries most in need, hardest hit, and yet already had financial debt issues with the EU in the past? Italy and Spain, for example. What did they come up with? Nada, nothing. By 5 o'clock this morning, the French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, had said, while hundreds and thousands of people are dying of coronavirus, you ministers sit there doing nothing. The whole future of the EU is at stake. Fundamentally, it comes down to how you allow a mechanism called the European Stability Mechanism, 240 billion euros, how you allow that to be accessed, for example, by Italy and Spain, and what conditions should be attached. Well, it's the Dutch that are the sticking point. The Dutch want a process whereby they promise to pay back these payments in the years to come. The Italians and Spanish say it's about a lack of trust. It's about unity. There's another meeting tomorrow.
Indeed, there will be huge figures, but of course, absolutely huge consequences as well. So let's bring you up to date with what is happening in Spain. The daily death toll there has risen for a second day in a row. 757 people lost their lives in just one single day. Now, that is an increase of 14 people on the previous day. It is, in fact, far lower than the record 950 deaths, which were reported on the 2nd of April. But it shows that this crisis in Spain is far from over. Almost 15,000 people have died across Spain, and the country has more confirmed cases than any other in Europe. However, the rate of new infections does appear to be stabilising, and so far at least 48,000 people have recovered. So police checks are intensifying across the country. It's to ensure that Spaniards do respect the lockdown ahead of this Easter weekend. This police drone footage shows those empty streets, only a few cars circulating. This is in the capital, Madrid. And you can also see police carrying out patrols in helicopters. This is over the Canary Islands. This is to make sure that people were not outside their homes for non-essential reasons. Some people in Tenerife and Fuerteventura, well, they were caught sunbathing on rocks or beaches. And yes, a big no-no from the officers there. Now, a senior World Health Organization advisor who has been visiting Spain gave us this update.
I don't want to use the word optimism, because in the face of such devastation and destruction and illness in a country, that is the wrong word, frankly. But there's hope, at least, and evidence that this outbreak is definitely slowing down.
So So the situation in Spain there, let's turn to France, which has gone into recession after its worst economic contraction since the Second World War. Now, the official figures show that the economy shrank by 6% in the first quarter because of the outbreak of coronavirus. Almost 11,000 people have died from COVID-19 in France. Stricter measures were introduced on Wednesday. It's on taking outdoor exercise. Authorities also announcing that a nationwide lockdown is being extended. President Macron is due to address the nation on Monday. Our correspondent Hugh Schofield has more on the ban on exercising outdoors in Paris.
A ban on jogging between 10 in the morning and 7 in the evening. The result, according to the town hall and the police, of the fact that too many people were crowding out into parks and gardens along the banks of the Seine during daylight hours and intermingling, not respecting social space and so on. And so they decided to impose this time restriction so that you can, of course, go jogging, but you can only do it early in the morning up till 10 and then in the evening from 7 o'clock. And I guess that'll make life a bit more uncomfortable for some people. But it's an example of, as you were saying, this option that's been given to towns and cities around the country to impose their own tougher rules where they think the government rules don't go far enough or aren't being properly heeded.
So the situation there in France. Let's turn to Germany, a country whose figures just haven't been as bad as many others in Europe. Researchers in Germany are predicting that the economy there could, even though the figures weren't so bad, they could contract nearly 10% this quarter. The German government has also said that it will accept 50 migrant children from camps on Greek islands. And when you can see the conditions that many migrants are living in on the island of Lesbos, these images from there, obvious concerns over the health situation in these overcrowded camps due to the coronavirus pandemic. So let's have a look at what's happening in Italy. There's been further evidence that the pandemic is slowing there. Italy recorded another 600 coronavirus-related deaths on Tuesday. So this now brings the death toll there to more than 17,000, but the number of infections rose by less than 1%. Now, in a different development, a road bridge has collapsed in the north of the country. But of course, due to the restrictions on movement, the very strict restrictions on movement there, it meant that only 2 people were injured in this. You can see this is the quite serious, dramatic aftermath of this incident. This is over the Magra River east of Genoa, the bridge breaking into several sections. This road, in fact, is normally extremely busy, but traffic in Italy, of course, greatly reduced because of the pandemic. When it comes to the figures, 43 people died in 2018 when a motorway bridge collapsed in Genoa. So it was a desperate tragedy, a difficult situation there now, but the figures, of course, not comparable. Now let's turn to Israel, which has introduced a curfew on the eve of Passover. People have been ordered to stay at home until 7 in the morning local time on Thursday. Now normally big crowds would gather for the burning of the chametz, the leavened items, things like bread, which aren't consumed or possessed by Jews during this religious holiday. But you can see there, due to people having to keep their distance, they've had to do things a little bit differently during this pandemic.
According to the government regulations, we're all supposed to only dispose of our chametz privately in our own homes, only in a safe way. And hopefully next year we'll be able to, when there will be hopefully no corona threat, we'll be able to come and redo public burning of chametz.
So a slightly different situation. Our global religion reporter, Lebu Deseko, is monitoring it for us. So, Lebu, the Jewish community who are already in some parts of the world marking Passover, they'll be doing it a little bit differently tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, Kasia, they will. In Israel, you just heard there just some of the things that people aren't able to do. Passover started a few hours ago for people living there. And on the first night, one of the things that people would usually do is hold a big meal called a siddur, where family, friends, community get together. They sing, they say prayers, they look at the holy text. And it's really about community and bringing people together. But obviously that can't happen. I've literally before came on air was looking at some of the things that people are doing just to try and maintain that sense of connection. So, for example, going out onto balconies and saying or singing the 4 questions, which is a big part of the Siddur meal, or cracking open the door for people that live in apartment buildings just so they can hear their neighbours and feel that sense of togetherness. I was also speaking to a rabbi that lives in New York, and he's been really encouraging people to try and relate some of the ceremonies to the situation we're going through at the moment. So, for example, the ritual washing of the hands, he says, is an opportunity to just remind people that in this day and age, that is something that could save people's lives.
Yes, it's a very simple message, isn't it? We've all been saying it for such a long time, wash your hands. This is a religious period at the moment. We've got Christians, they'll be staying away from Mass on Easter Sunday this weekend. Of course, Ramadan coming up as well. It's going to be a very different experience for many religious groupings.
Yeah, well, the Pope's really been leading by example on this one. He has been having all of his services this Holy Week without a congregation. He's been live streaming them, and he'll be continuing to do that for the foreseeable. I was speaking to a Christian lady who lives in Kenya. She was telling me how they're doing a Zoom communion on Friday, Good Friday. I didn't even know that that was possible, but that's something that they are planning to do. And also a group here in the UK were telling me how they're planning for Ramadan. One of the big things that happens every evening is people get together and break their fast together. They have a meal called an iftar. This group are planning or trying to have the world's biggest Zoom iftar. They'll be also having the call to prayer every evening. And something that really struck me when I was speaking to one of the organisers is she said, look, just because we're physically apart this Ramadan doesn't mean we have to feel alone.
Oh, that is a lovely thought on which to end. Lebu, thank you so much. It's a very strong message there. We are distanced, but we are still together. Lebu Diseko there, thank you so much for talking us through that.